one of the more confusing things that you might see on your balance sheet is negative equity. And this is also something that can cause a lot of panic for practice owners because the profit and loss can look great, but then when you go to the balance sheet, you might see negative equity and there's this large negative number. What does that mean? What does that mean for the practice? So this is something we've seen across multiple practices. Let's talk a little bit about what this is and what you should do, how much you should panic, and really action steps on this. So first of all, let's talk about what equity is. Equity is really what the business owes the owner after all the liabilities are paid. So as the practice is profitable, equity grows. There's profit coming into the business that the owner is allowed to take out. It shrinks when the practice does not have profit. When it loses money, then the business is owing the owner less money. There's less the owner can take out. It can go negative, and that does not always mean there's like a huge emergency or that the business is in trouble, but it is a good indicator to look at. So let's talk about why it might go negative. The most common reason we see negative equity is basically there's more distributions being taken out of the business than profit that's coming into the business. As profit comes into your business, it is increasing the equity in your business. As you take out distributions, you are reducing that equity. You're taking profit out of the business. So what we see often, especially in like early stage practices or a practice that's really growing and scaling, going through a lot of changes, is they will have more distributions going out than the profit coming in. For example, 5,000 in profit came in, but we took out 7,000 in distributions. That was creating negative equity that month. So oftentimes if that happens month after month after month, you kind of eat away all the profit growth that you had from previous months, or maybe you just didn't have any because the business is new and you now have negative equity. Other things that can cause this would be loans coming in. If you have to take out a large loan to like open a new location or furnish an office or just to cover cash flow, that's going to cause equity to shrink. And then if you have maybe like large one-time losses, like again, maybe you did like a bunch of renovations or you had to buy some sort of equipment or you had a lot of startup costs, those things will also reduce that equity. So that's all going to kind of hurt that equity picture. There also is a possibility of bookkeeping errors. It may be that something was not entered correctly. So I always want to make sure that your bookkeeping is telling the true story as well. And that's just kind of the truth across everything on the financial side. So those are things that can cause the equity to go negative. Not all of those are huge problems, right? If you are creating a new office and building that out, and there's some loans and some costs with that, but cash flow really is increasing, and there's a lot more potential for profit and revenue from that. Not a huge problem. Really, where we have more of an issue is if you have negative equity and you don't have cash flow coming in either, right? Where you have negative equity, the profit's kind of meh, and you're having a hard time meeting payroll, things like that. What that means is that basically that difference between what's going out of the business and what's coming into the business is very tight, or maybe even is negative. Whereas you need to be having positive cash flow, meaning there's more profit coming in than what you're taking out in distributions, or just more profit coming in general that you then can use to pay down loans and save up cash and do all those good things. So really kind of thinking of like, what's our cash flow, what's our profit situation is probably the first question to ask. If we have strong profit or profit is increasing over time, cash flow is increasing, negative equity is not necessarily a huge problem. It's still something we eventually want to get positive, but not a huge problem. If you see that negative equity continuing to get more and more negative and you don't have a ton of profit or a ton of cash, that's more so where you need to start thinking about, all right, what do we need to do to change this situation? So if you're in that second situation, really the next thing to do is talk to your CPA. Especially in an S corp, negative equity can really affect taxes in a lot of ways. You have what's called basis in your company, which is directly basically tied to your equity, and that can affect the deductions, your taxes, a lot of things that come along with that. So if you have negative equity, negative basis is what that really turns into, and that can affect the taxes and or the deductions that you're taking. So talking to your CPA and kind of understanding that situation is a great step to take if you do have that negative equity and you don't see that changing in the near future. Third, you do want to be making sure you're working with a professional bookkeeping firm to make sure that everything's tracked correctly, that there's no like misclassification or something that's causing that basis or that equity to be off or to not be accurate. And fourth, really you don't want to panic, but you also don't want to ignore this. It's not something that is the end of the world in most cases, but it's also something that you don't want to just keep around and have this negative equity all the time. So it's maybe not the most like exciting topic to dive in and try to fix, right? But really, negative equity often is telling you that there's some sort of deeper problem in the business. Maybe profit margin is really not sustainable for the business. Maybe you're taking too much out in distributions. Maybe it's a mix of those things. But oftentimes, it's a great warning sign to tell you that things are not as they seem. Things are not as positive as maybe they seem on the profit and loss. So this is a great number to make sure you look at monthly. Just compare like how did my equity change from last month to this month over the last 3 to 6 months. How did that change? And kind of going from there. This is exactly what we do in our monthly meetings. If you're confused by something on your financial statements, basically we talk through those in plain English without using that accounting jargon, to make sure that you can understand that and know what to do next, right? We don't want to just show you what's on the financial statements. We want to actually talk through how do we solve this and how do we move forward on this as well. So if that's helpful, happy to talk about that more. But yeah, this month, make sure to take a peek at that balance sheet, check out your equity and see how that's changed over the last couple months, and you'll get some helpful insights just from that quick peek.